And then we're now about. Hello and welcome to Black Crow Gaming. I'm your host Arron, and today we're doing a tactics show, and I've got someone new with me today. He's been with Black Crow for a wee while now, but I'm going to give him an opportunity to introduce himself and just give you kind of an idea of what he plays. So the stage is yours, my friend.
Hello, I'm Brent. I been with Black Crow for about a year now, which has been amazing, and I play Space Marines, and that's all I've really played this whole edition, the Hall of 10th. So I like to think I know a little bit about them, and yeah, really happy to be here. This is the first time on stream with you, Arron, so looking forward to it.
I mean, let's just say it's your first time. We're going to be talking about probably your favourite faction, and we're going to be bashing on them a little bit this video.
Oh yeah, hopefully so they don't get nerfed.
Oh yeah, so you're basically hoping that somebody in Games Workshop watches this right now and goes, "Oh, those weaknesses really overshadowed as the absolute brokenness of the army. Let's keep them as they are." What do you think of that?
I think that if I'll be lucky to keep my +1 to wound on my vanilla Blood Angels.
I think you might be too. But anyway, folks, before we get into it and before we start talking Black Crow tactics, I need you to do some magical things for me. If you could please hit those YouTube buttons, hit the like for me, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button, and once you see the bell, give that a little bit of a hit as well, because every time we post a video, you then know you don't miss any of Brent's beautiful face. Hey. And we also need to talk about today is some of our wonderful sponsors. We are sponsored by Glasshammer and Terrain Forge, and if you want 5% off of your miniatures, go to Glasshammer Gaming, pop in Black Crow, and you get an additional 5% off. Brent, have you used that additional 5% off yet?
Oh, all the time. I'm very looking forward to an Emperor's Children drop, and I can. Oh, I mean more Space Marines drop. Ah.
Well, you know, power armor's all the same, right? But that 5% will obviously come in useful for you. It'll takes what's already a 15% to 20% discount up to potentially 20, 25. And you know what? Times are hard, folks. You need to save some money. Our other lovely sponsor is Terrain Forge, and if you've been watching our wonderful bat reps, you'll see that all of our terrain has come from Terrain Forge. It's all custom made for us, and if you've got a cool team and you want to put your team logo on it, they can do that for you. They can do UKTC, they can do WTC, they can do whatever the hell TC you like. It's there and it's for you. So, Brent, are you ready to get into the weaknesses?
I am. I've prepped, and I'm a bit sad that I've got to tell everyone how to beat me, but here we go. Let's do this.
Let's go for it. Oh, scene change. So, we are starting with 5 Space Marine weaknesses. Now, these weaknesses are designed for what we have decided we think are weaknesses. You may think of others. And if you do think of others, please put them in the comments below, and myself and Brent will reply to you, and we'll have a discussion about it. And maybe, if we get enough, we'll bring it up in the next video, Brent. If we have to.
Yeah, absolutely. And
is wanted.
The only caveat to this is generic Space Marines. We will chat a little bit about the other chapters, but this is generic vanilla, the Codex compliant chapters.
And we will talk about the other chapters in later videos. Our plan is to do a whole series of every faction, 5 weaknesses associated to them, and this is just to help you guys improve at home, because why not? We all want to get better at the game, right?
We do indeed.
We do indeed. So, knowing your enemy matters, folks. And Brent, they're everywhere, aren't they?
Marines they are. They are the most played faction. I think in most tournaments, 40 to 50% of players will bring Space Marines because they're cool, and that, you know, when you start playing, they're a lovely army to start. You know, easy to paint, easy to understand the rules, but because of that, everybody understands the rules. They all know what's coming. They know what oaths does. They know how fast you are. They know how hard you hit, and because of that, it's really hard to play a deception game or anything where you're trying to be sneaky, because your opponent knows what you're doing.
And I think in this game especially, to get better at the game, you need to understand what different factions do. You need to understand different factions, and by having that little bit of knowledge can be the difference between you winning and losing a game. And and that is key, and that's why we go to a lot of events. We get to play into a lot of factions, and I think that's why it's really good to broaden your social circle. What do you think, Brent?
Yes, absolutely. Playing people makes a massive difference, especially factions you wouldn't normally play against. Like if you've got a friend that plays Gene Stealer cults, it might be your only friend that plays that. So it's good to have that in the bank.
Absolutely. So we're going to move on now, Brent. Shall we start talking some weaknesses? And I'm going to open the floor for you for weakness number one. You crack on, my friend.
Okay, as we've already sort of said, we're the most played faction. Everybody has reps into us, and unfortunately, because we're a starter faction, a lot of people it's their first faction that they play as, so the player skill level is probably a little bit lower than other factions. Like not many people walk into GW and say, "I want to start playing." I'm going to use say Gene Stealer cults again, but that's how it is generally.
And we've got to kind of realise that Space Marines, they are the poster child of 40k. Space Marine 2 recently released, and it brought in a huge wave of fans again. Obviously, Henry Cavill was a Custodes player, but his TV shows are
Never heard of him.
even talking about Space Marines. So everywhere we look, probably this face at some point, you will see
I
the
mean,
Space
Henry
Marines.
Cavill's no Toby Bennett, but I'll take it.
We'll take it. You know what? There's a close resemblance, though.
Could be brothers
Could be
split at
brothers,
birth.
twins.
One's just
But
had a higher protein diet or had some gene seed when they were young.
yeah, that's it. That's it. I get it. But you know what? Because everybody seems to be playing this faction, there is a lot of lists out there that have been built around in Space Marines, and particularly at this moment in time, Space Marines are everywhere. I think at the LVO there was 136 Space Marine players.
And a point to note is if you build a list to go to these tournaments and you think, well, I'm weak against Eldari, then that might not be the end of the world. You can still do well and be bad into Eldari. But if you build a list and you think, oh, I'm going to be bad into Space Marines, you're going to have a bad time because the chances are you're going to pair into them a few times. So everyone will be building that list with you in mind.
And I think there's also something to note as well that there are some similarities with Chaos Space Marines and Space Marines, and we'll touch on that as we go through some of the other weaknesses. So on to weakness two. Brent, my man, off you go.
Yeah, so Space Marines have a lot of toughness 4 to toughness 6 bodies, lots of free up armor saves, and that sounds great on paper until you realise that they're actually not that difficult to kill. They've only got 2 wounds. A lot of weapons kill Space Marines very efficiently, and you're generally running 5-man units, so you lose 2 or 3 models in the shooting phase or whenever, and suddenly you've taken a big hit. So especially with the change to Armor of Contempt, they're just not that tough as they used to be.
No, and I think the change to Armor Contempt was like a good
Oh,
balancing
yes. Yeah.
for us in the hobby, because actually it was quite powerful and it was really useful. And I've kind of put this on the side here, a little screenshot from my phone, folks, of just what Armor of Contempt is now. So it's a battle tax stratagem. It's 1 CP, your opponent's shooting phase or fight phase just after an enemy unit has selected its targets. 1 Adeptus Astartes unit from your army that was selected as the target of 1 or more of the attacking unit's attacks. Until the attacking unit has finished making its attacks, each time an attack targets your unit, worsen the armor penetration characteristic of that attack by 1.
Yes. Yeah, it's certainly incredibly useful, especially with how good cover is in this edition. They could, you're effectively doing -2 AP to incoming shots, and when you've got small units or only a couple of tanks, it makes a massive deal.
And the big change here for Armor of Contempt, for those that don't know, I'm kind of looking at it like, well, what has actually changed? You used to be able to take it for all incoming fire. Now it's 1 unit that targets your unit, and you get it for that 1 time, and you can only use this stratagem once in that particular phase.
Yes, especially this hurts hard, especially if you've got like a big Death Star unit and at the start of the phase, someone will go, oh, I'm shooting you. And you go straight up, Armor of Contempt, and then for the rest of the phase, that unit's safe. It is going to affect how Space Marine players, well, it has affected how Space Marine players are dealing with Armour of Contempt. They generally take more MSU style models and they ignore it until it comes to something really valuable.
Yeah, I can kind of see that. I mean, we talk about here as well, like Marines aren't particularly tough, but Deathwing Knights. I mean, like we talk about our friend Toby. Deathwing Knights, they're kind maybe an exception to the rule. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. So Deathwing Knights have a rule where when you shoot at them, they're -1 damage. And as we were talking about earlier, damage 2 is incredibly efficient into Space Marines. When that becomes damage 1, you are halving the efficiency of that shooting. So doubling the survivability. They are fantastic. They've got a 2-up armor save and they've got 4 wounds. So especially if you're halving damage, they're hard to kill and you don't really want to be in combat with them either. So
No,
yeah.
so they're kind of like our exceptions to the rule. If we're talking generic Space Marine bodies, I mean, we do. There is another caveat to that: is that the tanks are all quite tanky.
They are, especially the Ballistus Dreadnought and the Vindicator with their 2-up armor saves. They probably are doing better without Armor of Contempt than a lot of the Primaris tanks, so like the Gladiators. And another thing to note is the new Primaris tanks don't have smoke. So you're not going to be getting cover in places where you wouldn't have thought you're getting cover.
So no double bubble in there to
No double
do the
bubbling.
no -2. So we're going to move on to the weakness 3, and we've already gone quite in depth, which is really good. So let's move on. So weakness 3. So this idea of a lack of specialized units. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so I play a combined arms form of Space Marines. Like I like a few shooting units, so I might play some Ballistus Dreadnoughts or some Vindicators, and then some combat units. And it plays the mission really well. I have chaff, I have scouts. But what can happen is if I come up against an opponent like Chaos Knights or Normal Knights, and they have a play style which only makes a small segment of my army really useful into them. That means the rest of my army, it can go kick bricks, I guess. It's not going to be doing much that game, and it immediately puts you on the back foot.
It definitely feels like the damage and comes from specific units, doesn't it? In Space Marines, there's not like some armies where every unit can do quite a bit of damage or can be effective. They definitely have units which really are not designed to really do anything, any form of damage at all.
Mm. Yes, absolutely. So until recently, the intercessors were a great example of this. They had like 10 strength 4 shots. Um, AP1, once again, not ignores cover, so everyone will be getting cover from that. And okay, you do have hyper specialized units like your eradicators, but when they become too good, they generally get nerfed quite quickly. And I'm sorry, they GW are very keen on the. Oh God, sorry, I'm really.
And we're back. So we just had to pause the recording there because Brent lost his chain of thought because he was just too busy thinking of Space Marines. But we're now back and we're going to go back onto our chain of thought. So we're talking about this combined arms and specialized units, not really doing too much, but all of a sudden they're kind of coming out of the woodwork and being a little bit more specialized and doing a little bit more damage.
Yeah, so as I was saying, I play some Blood Angels, and I know we said we weren't going to go into the non-codex compliant chapters, but obviously that gives you a big hit in combat, but not so much in shooting. And with normal Space Marines, they don't get that buff, or so that the buff is sort of spread out across the whole army, especially if you look at the Gladius task force. And that makes it quite hard if you get stat checked, if you play against like a monster mash from demons and you just can't kill that greater unclean one with the 4-up feel no pain. It can happen to you.
Lovely. So we're going to move on to the next weakness. So we've kind of highlighted, just to recap, with there's a lack of specialized units. You're not overly tough, and everybody kind of knows what they do. So let's see what other weaknesses the Space Marines have. And we're going on to weakness 4. So you talk about speed being an issue, but is it an issue for Space Marines? Like, tell us why.
Well, I can tell you that if it wasn't an issue, a lot of our Dark Angels players wouldn't be running Stormlance Task Force because so much of it is only speed or speed movement value of 5 or 6, looking at you Terminators. you need the advance in charge just to keep them relevant. So Toby recently went to Nottingham with 15 Deathwing Knights, and he took Stormlance because it gives you that maneuverability to get units into the game. Even though if you look at that detachment, it doesn't have a lot of synergy with Terminators. It's literally got one thing going for it. I obviously, once again, I played Blood Angel, so speed isn't the biggest issue for me, but I do rely on advance and charge to extend my threat range, and I think that's a thing that a lot of Space Marine players have to deal with.
And I personally, as a Adeptus Custodian players, I always tell my opponents, I've got a 24-inch threat range, I've got a 30-inch threat range. And the reason I do it is because I bake advance and charge into almost everything I do. And that is because I want to be able to put this forward pressure onto units. Now, as soon as you come up against Space Marine players, and you ask the question, what are they taking? And they may take Vanguard, or they may take some of the other detachments. But the ability to move, advance, and charge is extremely strong in this game, because it means you can cover masses of board in a really short period of time, take objectives, steal objectives, and get models on point. However, Marines don't necessarily have that access if they're outside of this detachment. Am I right?
Yes, absolutely. And another issue with Gladius, which gives you advance and charge, is that you declare the stratagem in your command phase. So you might roll a 1 on your advance and only go 7 inches. And in this meta particularly, we play on UKTC terrain, and that's quite easy to hide in. You can be an inch away from the wall, you can be in the L shapes. So combat is a big deal at the moment.
Yeah, and you definitely find, if you are a combat army and you do have this access to advance and charge, that the ones typically are higher up in the rankings, or of the bigger tournaments typically are those ones who have access to this ability. So general Space Marine don't, and that's a problem for them, and they just found themselves getting caught out. Is what it is. So on to weakness 5. So you're talking about cheap action units, but I've got some scouts there for a reason, right?
Scouts are amazing. They might be the best 70-point unit in the game. My problem is when I play Necrons and they have a single heavy destroyer for 35 or 40 points, and it's just doing whatever it wants the whole game, because I don't want to. It's tough enough that I'll have to shoot something at it, but it's just going to do actions. It's not going to hurt me, but it's my opponent's scoring. There are other armies you play custodians, so you get access to 40-point witches, witch seekers.
Witch Seekers.
Witch Seekers, oh, and they have Scout, which is another fantastic thing. But yeah, so Space Marines, I think the cheapest unit is the Blade Guard Ancient at 45 points. But if I had access to a 40-point 4 or 5 man unit, Space Marine players would take 3 of them every single game, and twice on Sundays.
And you know what? We say that and we talk about Witch Seekers. I do have 3 units of Witch Seekers in my latest list, because you know what? Sometimes I just want to throw a cheap 40-point unit out into the middle to get me area denial in the first turn. If you draw it first turn, I just want to throw them there, because I don't care if you kill a 40-point unit. What I care about is if you kill a 100-point unit or a 200-point unit, and that doesn't feel right, does it?
No. And if your opponent doesn't have a 40-point unit, so you'd throw your Witch Seekers out, I would have to throw my Scouts out to deal with them. And then suddenly you're picking up the Scouts quite happily, probably with your spear guns. And I've basically lost 70 points for your 40. And in the long term, if you're playing like a game over 5 rounds, if it's not over quickly, that can really add up.
And I think that's something as well, is that Space Marine players need to protect these scouts and your cheap units, because if as soon as they go, you're having to use bigger, chunkier units to score those vital points for you, and you don't want to be in that position.
No, and Scouts, because they uppy downy, they're so good at scoring points late game. You don't want to be sacrificing them in the first few turns, not to screen out.
I mean, some players do though, don't you? You do see some people do literally put them right in front of you turn 1, and then, as a player, I'm kind of like, okay, you get rid of your scoring gate turn 1, and then what has the Space Marine player got to do? You either score points or you kill stuff.
Yeah, that's definitely a choice I've had to make, where I'm like, will the Scouts score me more points by denying you maybe 10, 15 points in the first round or two by just slowing you down? Or do I want to score the points later in the game. And that's a decision you have to make because, as I said, you don't have lots of cheap units. I have been running with playing some 40-point priest models in my Space Marine armies for exactly the same reason as the heavy destroyers are in there, just to put them on the side, put them in strategic reserve, and score some points.
And that makes sense. So we've kind of gone through our weaknesses, the 5 weaknesses for Space Marines, and they are quite generic. And we do, and our point, me and Brent were trying to make at the very beginning. If you consider all of these, if you're building a Space Marine army, if you're playing against a Space Marine army, it will give you some advantages. Knowing what your army's weaknesses are really, really important because you then have the ability to stop your opponent exploiting that weakness, and that's something that we all have to be really aware of. And I just want to kind of touch back on that point where we talked about like your lack of tough units. Some people might look at that and think, well, no, that's not true. We've got dreadnoughts, we've got vehicles, we've got X, Y, Z. And I just want to bring you another point here. All of those vehicles lack an invulnerable save, which is pretty wildly available to other vehicles in the game. They also, another thing that they do lack, which other vehicles do have, is sometimes their guns are a little bit lackluster. Like you might have 1 or 2 shots. Like the Vindicator is typically your most destructive unit, but how many points are they?
They're incredibly expensive, and they're called casino cannons for a reason. On certain rounds, you'll just fall up short. When you have a low density of shooting, the ability to spike up or down really it comes in. You can swing high or low with a Vindicator,
and you feel those losses, don't you? Especially if you're going into other hyper elite armies. Now, are Space Marines at that point now where we think they're now could be considered an elite army?
I think so. I think that, especially if you look at lists that are going well, if we look at Toby's list, because obviously he's gone 5-0 recently, he's not got as many units or models as I would have had maybe in Leviathan a year ago.
Yeah, and Toby's done amazing, but there is a caveat. He's gone Dark Angels,
Dark
Deathwing
Angels,
Knights,
Deathwing Knights.
and they
Um,
are pricey, but they're extremely elite and very good and
um,
very hard to shift.
if you look at more generic lists that do well, so let's look at the Ultramarines Vanguard. They typically have one big block of Centurions
They
that
do.
they move around the battlefield, and maybe another big block with Marnius Calgar, and then various little chaff things. But you're definitely playing around a couple of big hitting units now with Space Marines.
Yeah, and the problem with those Centurions as well is they don't have an invulnerable save. They've got a 2-up save, and they can definitely feel it as soon as strong attacking units go into them. Likewise with Marnius's list as well. If you get enough attacks in a concentrated form, they do crumble, and that's typically how you deal with these sort of big tough blobs. Space Marines don't have access widely to invulnerable saves, but what they have access to is utility.
Yes. Yep.
But that sounds like a good option for us to talk about them in a more positive video, and when we talk about maybe like sort of like tactics. So going forward, we're gonna move through back to the normal screen. So Brent, this is Brent's first video. It's been great having you come and join us, Brent. And our plan is to get Brent really comfortable if he enjoys doing this, and we're going to do some more content with him in the future. So, Brent, I just want you to give you a few minutes just to kind of say what to expect from yourself with the YouTube scene, and we'll probably say our goodbyes.
Oh, thanks, Aaron. So I've really enjoyed doing this. Thanks for everyone that watches. My one thing that I'd really like to do going forward with Black Crow Gaming is what's the play or tactical plays or big brain plays. I think that's really useful, especially mid-game when you're not sure what to do. That's something that I'm really keen on sharing my experience. I also really enjoy these videos where I get to talk to you about armies. So I'm really looking forward to just enjoying the experience with you going forward.
And we're gonna kind of break you into it slowly, somewhat. I mean, we've got lots more events going on in the future. Brent recently joined me at the Nottingham event, where he also you've got 3 wins, 1 draw, and 1 loss. So technically, you lost 1 game the entire event.
I did, yes. So I feel quite happy, and it was against a really good player, so I'm not too sad.
Oh, come on, you're allowed to name drop. Toby does it all the time. Go on, who was it?
It was against Brian Seep, or I don't know how to pronounce it, but he was amazing. I think it was the best game of the weekend. He was really a pleasure to play against.
Excellent. And you know what? That's what makes the tournament scene. Going and meeting these guys who you might hear from or you see high up in the rankings, having a great game with them, and then you get to walk away and learn something. So guys, look, it's been Arron and Brent from Black Road Gaming. I hope you've enjoyed our 5 weaknesses. Like I said, please, in the description below or in our comment section, tell us what other weaknesses you've identified and what you think would be a major weakness to Space Marines. Let us know, because these are just generic ones. But I've been Arron. I've got Brent here. See you
Pleasure.
guys later. Thank you very much.